Good evening, creatures. Auntie Menace here tonight with a requested reading of At the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft. Tonight we begin with Chapter 1. I am forced into speech because men of science have refused to follow my advice without knowing why. It is altogether against my will that I tell my reasons for opposing this contemplated invasion of the Antarctic, with its vast fossil hunt and its wholesale boring and melting of the ancient ice cap. And I am the more reluctant because my warnings may be in vain. Doubt of the real facts, as I must reveal them, is inevitable. Yet, if I suppressed what will seem extravagant and incredible, there would be nothing left. The withheld photographs, both ordinary and aerial, will count in my favor, for they are vivid and graphic. Still, they will be doubted because of the great lengths to which clever fakery can be carried. The ink drawings, of course, will be jeered at as obvious impostures, notwithstanding a strangeness of technique which art experts ought to remark and puzzle over. Yes. In the end, I must rely on the judgment and standing of a few scientific leaders who have, on the one hand, sufficient independence of thought to weigh my data on its own hideously convincing merits, or in the light of certain primordial and highly baffling myth cycles, and on the other hand, sufficient influence to deter the exploring world in general from any rash and overambitious program in the region of those mountains of madness. It is an unfortunate fact that relatively obscure men like myself and my associates, connected only with a small university, have little chance of making an impression where matters of a wildly bizarre or highly controversial subject are concerned. It is further against us that we are not, in the strictest sense, specialists in the field which came primarily to be concerned. As a geologist, my object in leading the Miskatonic University expedition was wholly that of securing deep-level specimens of rock and soil from various parts of the Antarctic continent, aided by the remarkable drill devised by Professor Frank H. Pabodie of our engineering department. I had no wish to be a pioneer in any other field than this, but I did hope that the use of this new mechanical appliance, at different points along previously explored paths, would bring to light materials of a sort unreached by the ordinary methods of collection. Pabodie's drilling apparatus, as the public already knows from our reports, was unique and radical in its lightness, portability, and capacity to combine the ordinary artesian drill principle with the principle of the small circular rock drill in such a way as to cope quickly with the strata of varying hardness. Steel head, jointed rods, gasoline motor, collapsible wooden derrick, dynamiting paraphernalia, cording, rubbish removal auger, and sectional piping for bores 5 inches wide and up to 1,000 feet deep, all formed, with the needed accessories, no greater load than 3 7-dog sledges could carry. This being made possible by the clever aluminum alloy of which most of the metal objects were fashioned. 4 large Dornier airplanes designed especially for the tremendous altitude flying necessary on the Antarctic plain, and with the added fuel warming and quick starting devices worked out by Pabodie, could gently transport our entire expedition from a base at the edge of the Great Ice Barrier to various suitable inland points, and from these points a sufficient quota of dogs would serve us. We planned to cover as great an area as one Antarctic season, or longer if absolutely necessary, would permit, operating mostly in the mountainous ranges and on the plateaus south of Ross Sea. Regions explored in varying degrees by Shackleton, Amundsen, and Scott and Bird, with frequent changes of camp made by airplane and involving distances great enough to be of geological significance, we expected to unearth a quite unprecedented amount of material, especially in that Precambrian strata of which so narrow a range of Antarctic specimens had previously been secured. We wished also to obtain as great a possible a variety of upper fossiliferous rocks, since the primal life history of this bleak realm of ice and death is of the highest importance to our knowledge of the Earth's past. That the Antarctic continent was once temperate and even tropical, with a teeming vegetable and animal life of which the lichens, marine fauna, arachnida, and penguins of the northern ridge are the only survivals. It is a matter of common information, and we hope to expand that information in a variety, accuracy, and detail. When a simple boring revealed fossiliferous signs, we would enlarge the aperture by blasting in order to get a specimen of suitable size and condition. Our borings, of varying depths and according to the promise held out by the upper soil or rock, were to be confined to an exposed or nearly exposed land surface, these inevitably being slopes and ridges because of the 1 or 2 mile thickness of solid ice overlying the lower levels. We could not afford to waste drilling depth on any considerable amount of mere glaciation, though Peabody had worked out a plan for sinking copper electrodes in thick clusters of borings and melting off limited areas of ice with current from a gas-driven dynamo. It is this plan, which we could not put into effect except experimentally on an expedition such as ours, that the coming Starkweather Moore expedition proposes to follow despite the warnings I have issued since our return from the Antarctic. The public knows of the Miskatonic expedition through our frequent wireless reports to the Arkham Advertiser and Associated Press, and through the latter articles of Peabody and myself. We consisted of 4 men from the university: Peabody, Lake of the biology department, Atwood of the physics department, also a meteorologist, and I, representing geology and having nominal command, besides 16 assistants, 7 graduate students from Miskatonic, and 9 skilled mechanics. Of these 16, 12 were qualified airplane pilots, all but 2 of whom were competent wireless operators. 8 of them understood navigation with compass and sextant, as did Peabody, Atwood, and I. In addition, of course, our 2 ships, wooden ex-whalers, reinforced for ice conditions and having auxiliary steam, were fully manned. The Nathaniel Derby Pickman Foundation, aided by a few special contributions, financed the entire expedition. Hence, our preparations were extremely thorough, despite the absence of great publicity. The dogs, sledges, machines, camp materials, and unassembled parts of our 5 planes were delivered to Boston, and there our ships were loaded. We were marvelously well equipped for our specific purposes, and in all matters pertaining to supplies, regimen, transportation, and camp construction, we profited from the excellent example of our many recent and exceptionally brilliant predecessors. It was the unusual number of fame of these predecessors which made our own expedition, ample though it was, so little noticed by the world at large. As the newspapers told, we sailed from Boston Harbor on September 2nd, 1930, taking a leisurely course down the coast and through the Panama Canal, and stopping at Samoa and Hobart, Tasmania, at which latter place we took on our final supplies. None of our exploring party had ever been in the polar regions. Hence, we relied greatly on our ship's captains, J.B. Douglas, commanding the brig Arkham and serving as commander of the sea party, and George Thorfinson, commanding the bark Miskatonic, both veteran whalers in Antarctic waters. As we left the inhabited world behind, the sun sank lower and lower in the north, and stayed longer and longer above the horizon each day. At about 62 degrees south latitude, we sighted our first icebergs, table-like objects with vertical sides, and just before reaching the Antarctic Circle, which we crossed on October 20th with appropriately quaint ceremonies, we were considerably troubled with field ice. The falling temperatures bothered me considerably after our long voyage through the tropics, but I tried to brace up for the worst rigors to come. On many occasions, the curious atmospheric effects enchanted me vastly, these including a strikingly vivid mirage, the first that I had seen, in which distant bergs became the battlements of unimaginably cosmic castles. Pushing through the ice, which was fortunately neither extensive nor thickly packed, we regained open water at south latitude 67 degrees east longitude 175. On the morning of October 26th, a strong land blink, appeared in the south, and before noon we all felt the thrill of excitement of beholding a vast and lofty and snow-clad mountain range, which opened out and covered the whole vista ahead. At last we had encountered an outpost of the great unknown continent and its cryptic world of frozen death. These peaks were obviously the Admiralty Range discovered by Ross, and it would now be our task to round Cape Adair and sail down the coast of Victoria Land to our contemplated base on the shore of McMurdo Sound at the foot of the volcano Erebus in south latitude 77 degrees. The last lap of the voyage was vivid and fancy-stirring. Great barren peaks of mystery looming up constantly against the west as the low horizon sun of noon or the still lowering horizon-grazing southern sun of midnight poured its hazy red rays over the white snow, bluish ice, and water lanes, and black bits of exposed granite slope. Through the desolate summits swept raging intermittent gusts of terrible Antarctic wind, whose cadence sometimes held vague suggestions of a wild and half-sentient musical piping, with notes extending over a wide range, and for which some subconsciously mnemonic reason seemed to me disquieting and even dimly terrible. Something about the scene reminded me of the strange and disturbing Asian paintings of Nicholas Roerich, and of still the stranger and more disturbing descriptions of the evilly fabled plateau of Leng, which occur in the dreaded Necronomicon of the mad Abdul Aharazed. I was rather sorry later that I had ever looked at that monstrous book in the college library. On the 7th of November, sight of the westward range having been temporarily lost, we passed Franklin Island and the next day descried the cones of Mount Erebus and Terror on Ross Island ahead. With the long line of the Parry Mountains beyond there, now stretched off to the east a low white line of the great ice barrier rising, perpendicularly, to a height of 200 feet, like the rocky cliffs of Quebec, and marking the end of southward navigation. In the afternoon, we entered McMurdo Sound and stood off the coast of the lee of the smoking Mount Erebus. The scoriatic peak towered up some 12,700 feet against the eastern sky, like a Japanese print of the sacred Fujiyama, while beyond it rose the white, ghost-like height of Mount Terror, 10,900 feet in altitude, and now extinct as a volcano. Puffs of smoke from Erebus came intermittently, and one of the graduate assistants, a brilliant young man named Danforth, pointed out what looked like lava on the snowy slopes, remarking that this mountain, discovered in 1840, had undoubtedly been the source of Poe's image when he wrote 7 years ago of the lavas that restlessly roll their sulphurous currents down your neck, in the ultimate climbs of the pole that groan as they roll down Mount Yanek, in the realms of the boreal pole. Danforth was a great reader of bizarre material and had talked a good deal of Poe. I was interested myself because of the Antarctic scene of Poe's only long story, the disturbing and enigmatic Arthur Gordon Pym. On the barren shore, and on the lofty ice barriers in the background, myriads of grotesque penguins squawked and flapped their fins, while many fat seals were visible on the waters swimming or spreading across large cakes of slowly drifting ice. Using small boats, we effected a difficult landing on Ross Island shortly after midnight on the morning of the 9th, carrying a line of cable from each of the ships and preparing to unload supplies by means of a breeches buoy arrangement. Our sensations on first treading the soil were poignant and complex, even though at this particular point the Scott and Shackleton expeditions had preceded us. Our camp, on the frozen shore below the volcano's slope, was only a provisional one, headquarters being kept aboard the Arkham. We landed all our drilling apparatus, dogs, sledges, tents, provisions, gasoline tanks, experimental ice melting outfit, cameras both ordinary and aerial, airplane parts, and other accessories, including 3 small portable wireless outfits besides those in the planes, capable of communicating with the Arkham's large outfit from any part of the Antarctic continent that we would be likely to visit. The ship's outfit, communicating with the outside world, was to convey press reports to the Arkham Advertiser's powerful wireless station in Kingsport Head, Massachusetts. We hoped to complete our work during a single Antarctic summer, but if this proved impossible, we would winter on the Arkham, sending the Miskatonic north before the freezing of the ice for another summer's supplies. The health of our land party, 20 men and 55 Alaskan sledge dogs, was remarkable, though, of course, we had so far encountered no really destructive temperatures of windstorms. The health of our land party, 20 men and 55 Alaskan sledge dogs, was remarkable, though, of course, we had so far encountered no really destructive temperatures or windstorms. For the most part, the thermometer varied between 0 and 20 degrees or 25 above, and our experience with New England winters had accustomed us to the rigors of this sort. The barrier camp was semi-permanent and destined to be a storage cache for gasoline, provisions, dynamite, and other supplies. Only 4 of our planes were needed to carry the actual exploring material, the 5th being left with a pilot and 2 men from the ships at the storage cache to form a means of reaching us from the Arkham in case all our exploring planes were lost. Later, when not using all the other planes for moving apparatus, we would employ 1 or 2 in a shuttle transportation service between this cache and another permanent base on the Great Plateau from 600 to 700 miles southeast beyond Beardmore Glacier. Despite the almost unanimous accounts of the appalling winds and tempests that poured down from the plateau, we determined to dispense with intermediate bases, taking our chances in the interest of economy and probable efficiency. Wireless reports have spoken of the breathtaking 4-hour non-stop flight of our squadron on November 21st over the lofty shelf ice, with vast peaks rising in the west and the unfathomable silences echoing to the sound of our engines. Wind troubled us only moderately, and our radio compasses helped us through the one opaque fog we encountered. When the vast rise loomed ahead between latitudes 83 and 84 degrees, we knew that we had reached Beardmore Glacier, the largest valley glacier in the world, and that the frozen sea was now giving place to a frowning and mountainous coastline. At last we were truly entering the white, eon-dead world of the ultimate south, and even as we reached it, we saw the peak of Mount Nansen in the distance, towering up to its height of almost 15,000 feet. The successful establishment of the southern base above the glacier in latitude 86 degrees and east longitude 174, and the phenomenally rapid and effective borings and blastings made at various points reached by our sledge trips and short airplane flights, are all matters of history, as are the arduous and triumphant ascents of Mount Nansen by Peabody and 2 of the graduate students, Gedney and Carroll, on December 13th through the 15th. We were some 8,500 feet above sea level, and when experimental drillings revealed solid ground only 12 feet down through the snow and ice at certain points, we made considerable use of the small melting apparatus and sunk bores and performed dynamiting at many places where no previous explorer had ever thought of securing mineral specimens. The Precambrian granites and beacon sandstones thus obtained confirmed our belief that this plateau was homogeneous with the great bulk of the continent to the west, but somewhat different from the parts lying eastward below South America, which we then thought to form a separate and smaller continent divided from the larger one by a frozen junction of Ross and Weddell seas, though Bird has since disproved this hypothesis. In certain of the sandstones dynamited and chiseled after boring revealed their nature, we found some highly interesting fossil markings and fragments, notably from ferns, seaweeds, trilobites, crinoids, and such mollusks as lingulae and gastropods, all of which seemed of real significance in connection with the region's primordial history. There was also a queer, triangular striated marking, about a foot in its greatest diameter, which Lake pieced together from 3 fragments of slate brought up from the deep blasted aperture. These fragments came from a point to the westward near the Queen Alexandria Range, and Lake, as a biologist, seemed to find their curious markings unusually puzzling and provocative, though to my geologist eye it looked not unlike some of the ripple effects reasonably common in the sedimentary rocks. Since slate is no more than a metamorphic formation into which a sedimentary stratum is pressed, and since the pressure itself produces odd, distorting effects of any markings which may exist, I saw no reason for extreme wonder over the striated depression. On January 6, 1931, Lake, Peabody, Danforth, all 6 of the students, 4 mechanics, and I flew directly over the South Pole in 2 of the Great Plains, being forced down once by a sudden high wind which fortunately did not develop into a typical storm. This was, as the papers have stated, one of several observational flights, during others of which we tried to discern new topographical features in areas unreached by previous explorers. Our early flights were disappointing in the latter respect, though they afforded us some magnificent examples of the richly fantastic and deceptive mirages of the polar regions, of which our sea voyage had given us some brief foretastes. Distant mountains floated in the sky as enchanted cities, and often the whole white world would dissolve into a gold, silver, and scarlet land of Dunsinian dreams and adventurous expectancy under the magic of the low midnight sun. On cloudy days, we had considerable trouble in flying, owing to the tendency of the snowy earth and sky to merge into one mystical opalescent void with no visible horizon to mark the junction of the two. At length, we resolved to carry out our original plan of flying 500 miles eastward with all 4 exploring planes and establishing a fresh sub-base at a point which would probably be on the smallest continental division, as we had mistakenly conceived it. Geological specimens obtained there would be desirable for the purposes of comparison. Our health so far had remained excellent, lime juice well offsetting the steady diet of tinned and salted fish, and temperatures generally above 0 enabling us to do without any of our thickest furs. It was now midsummer, and with haste and care we might be able to conclude work by March and avoid a tedious wintering through the long Antarctic night. Several savage windstorms had burst upon us from the west, but we had escaped damage through the skill of Atwood in devising rudimentary airplane shelters and wind-breaking of heavy snow blocks, and reinforcing the principal camp buildings with snow. Our good luck and efficiency had indeed been almost uncanny. The outside world knew, of course, of our program, and was also told of Lake's strange and dogged insistence on a westward, or rather northwestward, prospecting trip before our radical shift to the new base. It seems that he had pondered a great deal, and with alarming radical daring, over that triangular striated marking on the slate, reading into it certain contradictions in nature and geological periods which whetted his curiosity to the utmost, and made him avid to sink more borings and blastings into the west-stretching formation to which the exhumed fragments evidently belonged. He was strangely convinced that the markings were the print of some bulky, unknown, and radically unclassifiable organism of considerably advanced evolution, notwithstanding that the rock which bore it was of so vastly ancient a date, Cambrian, if not actually Precambrian, as to preclude the probable existence not only of all highly evolved life, but of any life at all above the unicellular, or at most the trilobite stage. These fragments, with their odd marking, must have been 500 million to 1,000 million years old.